Imagine settling into a luxurious first-class seat, ready to enjoy your flight, only to find yourself the target of subtle but cutting hostility. That's exactly what happened to one black woman, who was met with unwarranted suspicion and demeaning treatment from the flight crew. From side eyes to condescending remarks, it became clear that actions weren't just coincidence, they were deliberate. But instead of staying silent, she chose to stand her ground. What started as microaggressions quickly escalated into a situation that would expose their behavior for the world to see. By the end of this flight, the tables had turned, and their actions would have serious consequences they never saw coming. How did she manage to hold her composure and fight back so effectively? And what happened next that would ultimately change their careers forever? Stay tuned, because this story is about to take an unforgettable turn. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the woman couldn't help but notice the subtle ways she was being singled out. The flight attendant's tone toward her was sharp and dismissive, in stark contrast to the warmth shown to other first-class passengers. She tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe she was overanalyzing things. But then came the accidental spill of a drink near her seat, the double-checking of her ticket, and the whispered conversations among the crew that always seemed to stop as she glanced their way. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the pattern was undeniable. The other passengers in first class exchanged awkward glances, some pretending not to notice, while others seemed quietly uncomfortable. Was anyone going to speak up? Or would they let this behavior slide? Little did the crew know, the woman was quietly observing, taking mental notes, and preparing to respond in a way they'd never expect. As the flight continued, the woman's patience was tested again and again. It wasn't just the tone or the stares, it was the blatant disregard for her comfort. Requests for basic service were met with eye rolls or delayed responses, while other passengers were catered to with ease. At one point, a flight attendant even questioned whether she was in the right seat, despite her first-class ticket being clearly visible. The murmurs among the crew grew louder, and their smug expressions made it clear they thought they were untouchable. Other passengers began to take notice. A man sitting across the aisle glanced at her with a look that seemed to say, "This isn't right." But no one said a word. The tension in the cabin was palpable, and she could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. Still, she didn't react right away. Instead, she remained calm, quietly documenting every insult and slight. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about the bigger issue of being treated unfairly in spaces where she had every right to be. What the crew didn't realize was that their actions weren't just unprofessional, they were crossing serious lines. And soon they would be held accountable in a way they never expected. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the situation escalated. One of the flight attendants, clearly emboldened by the lack of intervention from other passengers, approached the woman with a dismissive smirk and an unnecessary warning about following the rules in first class. It was completely unprovoked, and the tone was loud enough to draw the attention of everyone nearby. The woman held her composure, offering a calm but pointed response that left the attendant momentarily stunned, but the tension only grew thicker. Not long after, the crew huddled near the galley, whispering again. This time, the woman noticed one of them glancing in her direction with what could only be described as disdain. It felt personal now, and the energy in the cabin had shifted entirely. Passengers were restless, stealing uneasy looks between the woman and the crew. A young couple a few rows ahead whispered to each other, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. But the woman wasn't fazed. She had been here before, not in a literal sense, but in situations where she had to navigate prejudice while maintaining her dignity. Little did the crew know, her calm demeanor wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a strategy. She had everything she needed, witnesses, details, and undeniable evidence. And she was about to use it all. The crew may have thought they held all the power, but they were seconds away from losing control of the narrative entirely. Just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any more tense, the captain emerged from the cockpit and approached the woman's seat. The entire cabin went quiet, eyes darting between the woman and the crew. Was this another attempt to intimidate her? The captain, speaking in a rehearsed tone, explained there had been a misunderstanding and asked if everything was all right. The woman's calm but firm response left no room for doubt. She detailed each incident, from the tone of the crew to their overt disrespect. The captain appeared uncomfortable, glancing back at the crew, who now stood frozen, clearly caught off guard. But instead of addressing the issue directly, the captain offered an insincere apology and returned to the cockpit. That's when things took an unexpected turn. A passenger seated a few rows back stood up. "I saw everything," he said, his voice loud enough to carry through the cabin. "This wasn't a misunderstanding." Another woman chimed in, "It's been unacceptable from the start." The passengers' voices, once silent, were now growing louder. The crew looked uneasy, her confidence visibly shaken. But the woman wasn't finished. She calmly reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She had documented everything: photos, videos, even audio clips. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder as they realized what was happening. Suddenly, it wasn't just her word against theirs. It was her word backed by proof. And with the other passengers starting to speak up, the crew's behavior was no longer hidden behind polite smiles. The stakes had just been raised, and the balance of power was beginning to shift in her favor. As the murmurs in the cabin grew louder, the woman calmly stood up and addressed the passengers. "I've been quiet long enough," she began, her voice steady but firm. "What's happened on this flight is more than just rude behavior. It's discrimination, and I have the proof to back it up." She held up her phone, scrolling through the videos she had recorded. Gasps filled the cabin as the passengers realized the extent of what she had captured. Condescending remarks, dismissive tones, and even one crew member openly rolling their eyes as she asked for basic service. The passengers who had initially stayed silent began to speak out, one by one. "I saw it too," said the man across the aisle. "They treated her completely differently." Others nodded in agreement, their voices building a collective momentum that the crew could no longer ignore. The flight attendants, now visibly panicked, tried to downplay the situation, but it was too late. The woman, composed but determined, asked to speak with the airline's customer relations team upon landing. The captain was called back, and this time he looked far less confident as he assured her the matter would be reviewed. But the real twist came when the plane landed. As passengers disembarked, the woman was met by a small crowd at the gate, members of the airline's corporate office, alerted by her social media posts that had already gone viral mid-flight. Her documentation, combined with the growing support of the passengers, had reached a wider audience than anyone could have anticipated. The crew's behavior wasn't just being questioned, it was being broadcast to the world. And as the corporate team ushered her into a private room to discuss the incident, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a personal victory for her. It was a turning point, a moment that would force the airline to take accountability for its practices. The crew had underestimated her, but in the end, her poise and persistence had turned their arrogance into their downfall. After a thorough discussion with the airline's corporate team, the woman was assured that her complaints were being taken seriously. They reviewed her recordings and promised an internal investigation into the crew's behavior. The passengers who had spoken up also shared their accounts, reinforcing her claims. The company issued a formal apology on the spot and offered to compensate her for the ordeal. But for the woman, it wasn't just about personal restitution. She used her platform to shine a light on the broader issue of discrimination and how it often goes unchecked in spaces meant for everyone. Her story quickly gained traction online, sparking conversations about accountability and fairness. As for the crew, their actions had consequences. Reports surfaced later that some were suspended pending further review. The woman's calm strength and refusal to back down not only brought justice, but served as a reminder that silence isn't the answer to injustice.